Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the How to Fitness podcast with me, Michael Ujoa.
And me, Kate Lyman.
And today we are back with Kate's deep dive. Kate, how are you doing?
Okay. I don't know. I'm having a really high stress week. And last night, as I was still editing my script late into the night, I thought, why am I doing this? Why do we have a podcast? Just, questioning life decisions just felt like a thing that wasn't necessary. But then this morning I'm like, I love doing this. So
it's funny, isn't it? I think that's just the weird world of content creation. I go through massive waves of being like, best job ever. I love doing this. And then you'll have another week where you're like, sucks. Like,
yeah.
what are we doing? Yeah, let's throw in the towel. But I'm glad that this morning you're feeling positive.
Yeah, I'm in it today. So we're good.
Good.
If we'd had to record last night, it would have been a different story. But
okay.
But we're fine. And you know what? As we've done, we're in season 2 now. We're quite a few deep dives in. I'm definitely getting a little more streamlined in like my research process,
Cool.
in the tools I'm using, in my like writing a little bit. Kenny last night said, this is like you having to write like a college essay every few weeks. And I was like, I think it is. Like I have right in front of me about 13 pages, single space, with references, and all. Then like, we don't need to be doing this, yet here we are. And the deep, dark part of me enjoys it.
I enjoy it too. And you're not just handing it to your lecturer, professor, whatever. We're posting it out to hundreds of people on the internet. They're going to critique it. So possibly even more intimidating.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
I want to get right into it today. As with every deep dive, there's like a bazillion directions I wanted to take this topic. Today we're talking about nutrition labels, and I started out like kind of outlining the history of nutrition labels and thinking about, okay, how have they evolved over time, and what's our connotation with thinking about, like, what do we think about when we see a nutrition label? Is it more about health? Is it more about safety? What are we even thinking about? And then it kind of evolved into me thinking, do we see these as positive or negative? Are these helpful or harmful? And then it evolved into just deep diving into like the history of where calories came from, which is so, left field. So I had to rein it back in. Anyway, I hope this works. There's so much I want to talk about, and we'll just go and see where it goes.
I'm excited. Yeah, there's a lot of avenues with this. So yeah. I have no idea which route you're taking it down. And for that, I'm excited. I also just want to make a point on you saying, let's jump straight into it. Because I've had a few messages now from people saying, I listen to a lot of fitness podcasts and they always talk for about 15 minutes at the start about what they're going to talk about. And I hate it. Whereas you guys just jump straight into the topic. So for that, Kate, let's jump straight in and give the people what they want.
On it. Let's do it. Wait, I want a side note. So, just backtrack from what that person just said. Do you watch, or have you watched the American version of The Office?
Not as much. I think I watched like most of the first series, but that was it. Yeah.
There's this quote where Michael Scott says, like, sometimes I start a sentence and I don't know where it's going, so I just have to like go for it. I have to figure out the real quote, but that's how I feel today. So we're just gonna like see where it goes.
I like it. Hopefully that quote was a little bit different than the program. We're just going to quote you from now on with that, Kate. Perfect. So run with it.
Perfect. Okay. To start, Michael, I want to know, just before we even dive into all of this, what's the stance you take on nutrition labels when you work with your clients? Like, are you helping them read them? Do you just kind of ignore it? Do you stay neutral?
It depends on the person I'm working with. I think it's good for people to be kind of semi-aware of what's on a nutrition label, but I also think that people can read too much into them and obsess over it too much. So I think in terms of maybe, as I said, depending on the client, like caloric intake, maybe protein, fat, and carbs, but I don't go full kind of anti-toxin like those people that shout at ingredients labels in the supermarket on social media. But I like people to be informed, but not overly obsessive with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I knew your answer would be like nuanced and careful and it depends thing, right? Because it's same. Like when I work with my clients, we never talk about like, here's how to read a nutrition label. But for a lot of the individuals that we work with in the framework of tracking our food in some capacity, maybe as a very temporary tool, maybe just as like awareness tool for a week or so. And I think, my goal in that is to bring more awareness to our food choices. So I think some awareness of the nutrition label is important to some extent. I don't know that like being oblivious to it is helpful either. But I'm never like teaching them. Maybe I've done some like corporate nutrition talks. Maybe I've done that in there, but I don't know. I always opt for like more knowledge rather than ignoring that they exist.
I think it's a good balance. It is a fine balance, isn't it? I'm sure there's many coaches that kind of go a bit overkill with it. But yeah, I think a little bit of knowledge is powerful. A bit too much, people can start to obsess a little bit. So yeah,
Totally.
fine line to tread.
And I really want to talk about that kind of gray area between those two extremes today and figure out where and if nutrition labels fit into that gray area, because I can see, I don't know, it's a very nuanced topic as always. So today I want to deep dive into the history of food labeling and not only how we got to where we are today, which is kind of labels galore, calorie counts on menus, confused why our labels go off of this 2,000 calorie standard that doesn't really make sense for everyone, but what it means for us in our relationship with food and our specific needs and knowledge. And I'm going to speak today mostly within the context of what food labeling looks like in the United States. It's what I'm most familiar with. It's where most of our clients are. It's where most of our listeners are. But we will touch a little bit on the UK and some other countries. I got some fun facts about Mexico. But okay, Michael and listeners, a few questions. First, Michael, can you remember a time where you were not attentive to nutrition labels?
Yeah, I can. I think whilst I was at university slash college, I I think I lived. So there was people from the UK will laugh at this because they'll know what it is. There's a kind of like ready-made meals called Aunt Bessie is the brand, and there's Aunt Bessie Toad in the Hole, which is like sausage with kind of like a Yorkshire pudding type thing around it. I used to live off those at university. I would hate to look at a nutrition label to see what kind of kept me going throughout university, but no, I just never really paid attention back then at all. This is kind of pre working in fitness and being a bit more self-aware, and no.
Wow. Okay. Cool. That's different. That's different. I feel like I've been really in tune from a young age, but more like, okay, high calorie means bad. High fat means bad, but not necessarily like the knowledge of how to actually read or understand a nutrition label. Just like this very like kind of like fear towards it. And for those listening, I'd love for you to think on that and what your answer is and how it may have shaped your relationship with food. That's definitely a point of curiosity that's come up for me a lot in this topic.
Yeah.
Like, for being more aware, is it a negative thing? Has it been a positive thing? Is it a mixed bag? Were you able to sail through life up until university completely?
I think that's what it was. Like, I think also I was always like a super active person. Genetically, I'm quite a slim dude, so I never really kind of cared too much about calorie intake. So I probably have to check my privilege in terms of that a little bit. But yeah, I think I probably was maybe a little bit more aware than I was giving into there, but I mostly didn't really look. I just bought what I could afford and whatever sustained me throughout my brutal hours at uni. Yeah.
Toad in the stool? What'd you say?
It's called Toad in the Hole. It's weird name. I don't know why it's called that because it doesn't look like a toad at all. But yeah, it's literally just like a sausage with this like batter type thing around, which is like a Yorkshire pudding, and it is delicious. Maybe not Aunt Bessie's ones. It's very like generic level, but a Toad in the Hole, if done right, is delicious.
I can't get over that name. That's like, to me, okay, first off, it sounds very British. And then also, I'm like, that's not an appealing name to me. Toad? I don't want to eat a toad.
It's delicious.
Oh,
like if you next time you come to the UK, make a beeline for a restaurant that does Toad in the Hole.
I'm down. Yeah. Okay, so this is my last question for you, and we're going to revisit this question a few times as we gain more information about this topic. But I want you to give me like a quick answer, like your quick fire answer on what's your take on nutrition labels, helpful, harmful?
Oh, that's really difficult, isn't it? Helpful, however, overly complicated.
Okay, cool. Love that. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't looking for a specific answer. I just think like I've changed my answer about 20 times the last 2 weeks doing this topic.
I think it's just the fact that it has, I think the serving sizes are weird. It's like per 100 grams when no one really knows what that is unless you're weighing out your food particularly, which most people do not. So yeah, I think in terms of that, it feels a bit overly complicated and confusing.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's get into it. Now, Michael, you and I really can't think back to a time before nutrition labels where nutrition facts were printed on every item in the grocery store. And that's the case for anyone under their mid-30s-ish, because nutrition labels as we know them today are about 30 years old. That's not that old, really. I kind of thought they would be around longer. And actually what I learned, maybe I'll talk about this in a second. So never mind. I'm gonna put a pin in it for now. Labeling, food labeling is not new. Like Egyptians were labeling their food with hieroglyphs, and in the medieval times they were labeling the origin of wine so it couldn't be adulterated, all this stuff. So food labeling isn't new, but all of the labeling we know up until about the 20th century was far more about identifying foods and food origin more than any nutritional component. And as we go through time, we see food labeling advance as a response to safety and illness prevention. So in the 1800s, foodborne illness was far more common than it is today, and it could strike anyone, including the president. Dun, dun, dun. It's my drum for the episode. So the 12th president of the U.S., Zachary Taylor, is one of the most infamous presidential deaths due to food poisoning. And it's kind of unclear which food caused his death, but it's agreed upon that Taylor contracted a stomach infection during a summer picnic, which is just like a really sad end. And we have a lot of presidents. I don't know. I mean, not compared to you and your kings and such, but I don't really know much about him except that he died from a picnic. Like that's been my knowledge always.
That's a really sad way to go because picnics are happy. Like that's a happy experience going for a picnic. So for that to be your downfall.
Till it kills you. Yeah.
Bad way to go, yeah.
So partially in response to Taylor's death, his successor, who was good old Abe Lincoln, created the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, 1862. And to this day, the USDA works to ensure food safety manufacturing across the country. Now, as we go along a little bit later, industrialization allowed the agricultural sector to flourish, and food labels became increasingly important. The invention of refrigeration and canning allowed food to be distributed nationwide. So instead of, eating out of your own garden or your own neighborhood, you're eating imported, exported food. And this meant that customers were no longer close to their food sources and that millions of people had access to the same products. It became even more important that large food companies were cognizant of their production methods and their branding. So in 1906, Congress signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, and this act prevented food makers from altering or misbranding food products. The act also created the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. And you probably recognize the FDA as the organization that still enforces safe food and drug manufacturing processes to this day. And for us, Michael, it's kind of what we're like bantering on about when we're comparing differences in food quality and regulations between the US and the UK. So I did work on this whole timeline of like various food regulations and events that preceded us ending up to in where we are today with nutrition labels as the standard and something we really can't go to the grocery store without seeing. But it's like a little dull. So I'm going to give you a short like bullet point list rather than delve into that whole timeline because I think there's more exciting things to talk about here. Now, one note is post-World War I, fortification of food became really popular. Now, today, for us, that's the norm, like fortified cereal and milk and enriched flour, etc. But in response to this fortification, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was signed by FDR in 1938 because there were also more artificial flavors and preservatives added to our food. So still, this is 1938, still this is about food safety and kind of manufacturing regulations. And this is what I was looking for in this timeline. Like, when did this switch to be a health thing and a calorie thing, right? Because I don't know about you, but when I think about nutrition labels today, right now as they are, I think about like this is about calorie control, kind of, right? Like I'm not looking at them to ensure that my food is safe and not poisoned.
Yeah, I think I never thought of them as being something that would be in terms of a safety aspect.
Right.
I always thought of it just more like nutritional balance.
Exactly, right.
Mm-hmm.
So I want us to think back to our episode on the history of dieting. We know that dieting is nothing new, but the widespread popularity of like calorie counting and different dieting methods is definitely more modern. We learned this in that episode that you did. So there's a point where food labeling shifted from this health and safety focus to more awareness on calorie, fat, and sugar content. And from what I can extract from my timeline, this shift primarily took place during the 70s and 80s as dietary research expanded on topics like the effect of sodium, sugar, and fat on overall health. And this research informed the development of the nutrition facts label, which is now ubiquitous in the American food market and I think in different formats everywhere. So the standard black and white nutrition facts label that we know now was officially instituted in the 90s as part of the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act. And the goal of this law was to provide more information to consumers so they could make healthy food choices. The new food label meant that companies had to report attributes like calories, serving size, fat, and sugar content. And it was about the same time that the UK passed a similar law. But this is what I was going to say earlier. It wasn't until 2016 that the EU passed a law requiring that all foods have a nutrition label similar to the American labels. So do you notice that was there like a shift in 2016 for you to like all foods having labels? Or did it seem like that before?
It kind of seemed like that before, but I'm vaguely remembering something happening back in, of kind of all foods having to have something. That's really bad. I feel like I should remember that happening. Also, the UK likes to be a little bit different to the rest of the EU, so I wonder whether they maybe had different rules to the EU prior to that anyway.
It didn't seem like it was a huge shift. Like maybe that went from like most mass-produced generic snacks having, labels to like maybe smaller brands had to have labels, and that's something you don't notice the shift as much.
That's still so recent though, as
Yeah,
well.
it feels very recent. Regardless, it's basically like these last 30 years where we've been barraged by nutrition labels on most of the foods we eat. And I learned that you in the UK have a color coding system. So green is like low level of a nutrient, red indicates a high level of nutrient. Yeah. So when I'm talking about nutrition facts, is that kind of what pops up in your head?
Yeah. Do you not have that then in the US?
No, we have like this rectangle, black and white, with like all the numbers and percent daily values, and there's no colors.
So like that's most of what I make a beeline for in terms of labeling, is people look at the color coding system, but then you have to be quite careful because it'll be like green, so it's good. I'm using air quotation marks, but then you look at the serving size and it's doing it for like 100 grams when like a regular serving for an average person would be like 400 grams. Even though it looks like a green on the label, if you ate the normal size, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, and like how are you supposed to know what 100 grams is? I don't know.
Exactly.
I have ample time measuring my food, and I don't know what 100 grams is off the top of my head for most things.
Same. It's that's weird. I assume you guys had the color coding thing too. I kind of like it for like a quick browse of stuff, but yeah, it can be a little bit misleading as well. So is it really helpful? I don't know.
And that's kind of where we're going here. So to touch on a few other countries, French labels have a letter rating, so like A, B, C, D, to indicate how nutritious a food is. And in the Czech Republic, Argentina, and Nigeria, they have something called a choice logo to indicate a healthy food. I tried to look it up, but I saw a variation of options, so I'm not really sure exactly what I was looking at.
I wonder what they count as. Is it like a certain amount of nutrients per?
That's the thing.
Like how
the standards are a bit wacky, because like I think of your color coding, and if green just means low, is it just low calorie foods that are getting the green? Because what if
Usually,
you need a higher calorie food that's like higher calorie but nutrient dense?
So you'll look at these like healthy, once again, air quotation marks, that a lot of diets will recommend that you eat, like these low fat yogurts and low sugar yogurts and stuff. They'll be like low in everything, so it's like green, but it's how nutritious / filling as is it actually,
Right, like if it's low fat, you've taken out the fat and you've probably added sugar and sodium to make up for that, and then it's like that's not bad. We know that we don't label foods good and bad, but that's not necessarily a more healthful option than the real stuff. So that's what I mean. Like I don't know. It said similar logos are used in Singapore and the Nordic countries to make healthy foods easily identifiable. So I don't. But what does that mean? I don't know. So in Mexico, there's these black stop signs. They're like a little ominous, and they're required to be front of package. So these black stop signs, they'll say like excess added sugar or excess fat or high calorie or artificial sweetener added. And there's required to be front of package, and they indicate if something is like high in one of these things that you should be, quote, avoiding. And so I was kind of looking at this more, like this is what I know from seeing the food that I buy.
I think I've seen you share that on your story before.
Yeah,
I think you've mentioned that in
have.
the past. Yeah. I remember seeing them. Yeah.
But like pistachios, if you go get like a little serving size thing of pistachios, like warning, excess fats, and you're like, well, I know they're pistachios.
Do you ever have that thing where it's like a packet of peanuts and it's like may contain nuts written on the bag. That's always
It
my
probably
favorite.
says that. Actually, I don't know. No one's really cautious of nut allergies around here. Okay, so I found this article in Stat News about all of this litigation from Kellogg's and Coca-Cola in Mexico as a response to these labeling regulations, because these are major food production companies here in Mexico, I mean worldwide really. And it said that in response to this front of label requirement, companies are printing dual-sided products. So think like your cereal box has the front and the same print on the back, so that one side can have that front of label, warning, and in the grocery store they can place it with the other front without the label facing out. So we have cereal in our house, and the cereal, yep, dual-sided label, one side. My Coca Light, same deal. Our cream cheese, it's like a Philadelphia cream cheese. I noticed, same exact thing. Wow, that's real sneaky. That's really sneaky.
And when you put it in your cupboard, which way round do you put it?
I don't know. I've never paid attention to it until now.
Okay, we need to start paying attention to this and see which way you round you put it.
I'm like, ugh, let's hide that ugly black stop
probably.
sign, So this was just one of the major loopholes that food brands were working through. And in the premise of this article that I read was kind of that similar regulations and litigation may be coming to the U.S. But I'm off track now. I digress. I wish I was brave enough to take on like a food politics deep dive one day, but I don't know if I have it in me.
Kate versus the FDA.
I don't know if I have it in me. So let's talk about your funny serving sizes, because I didn't know that it was per 100 grams.
I think, but it kind of changes as well.
Yeah.
There's not like a standard. So that's also another issue. So like different products will use a different standard to measure it by. And then it'll be like per quarter serving or whatever. It's like, well, what's a serving? Like it just makes no sense a lot of the time.
So I don't know if this is essential information for anyone listening, but I do want to give a quick mention to like not just the serving size, but also the like based off the 2,000 calorie standard, which it looks like. I looked at some of your food labels, not gonna lie, they're really confusing to me just because I'm not familiar with them. There's no other reason, but it looks like your labels are also going off of like this 2,000 calorie standard. Does that sound right?
Potentially.
You don't know? Because there's like a percentage.
Yeah, but it kind of does it by serving size. That's what I'm saying. Like it kind of feels like it's different on different things. So like
that's extra confusing. So from what I can find, the 2,000 calorie standard was created because it's like a nice number. It's like general consistent number, and I can't find a clear reason beyond that. It's like because it is. Like that's the best answer I found. Like I searched high and low for like a hard reason why we'd go off the 2,000 calorie standard, and one was like because of historical significance. I was like, what does that even mean?
No sense.
Yeah. And we know that
I'm trying to think, is it off by like what the general recommended calorie intake is for like a man or a woman? Is it like from that?
I guess so, but that's 2,000.
Because it's 2,000
for everyone.
So in the UK, I think it's like 2,500, I think is the general. This is like a very vague number. They're just like, yeah, men should have 2,500 calories, but women should have 2,000 calories, apparently. So maybe they're just like, it's the lower end. Let's use that as a... Yeah, it's different for men and women.
I mean, I guess I get it, because it's like you need to have a number, I guess, to make these percentages off of and to do the serving size. I don't know. But here's the thing. Like, we know that our nutritional needs vary greatly from person to person. And so, like, age, weight, height, but also activity level, muscle mass, dieting history, these all play a role here. So, like, no, it doesn't mean 2,000 calories is the gold standard, because that's way too low for many people. Maybe way too high for some people, like an older individual or a smaller, more petite individual. I don't know. There's no way there can be like an actual standard, because we vary in our needs so much. So it's just because it is. Now, the serving size. I don't know what's going on with you people and your serving sizes. I don't even get it.
Neither do I. Don't worry.
Here's how it goes in the U.S. The labels are required to indicate serving sizes, and there's a lot of debate whether it's a useful metric or not. And there's common confusion to what a serving size is. Like, is it recommended quantity to eat in one sitting? Or is it just a number that makes for decent round nutritional information? Like, there's no standard for it. But in the US, serving sizes are based off of reference amounts customarily consumed, RACCs. These represent how much a person would reasonably eat in a sitting, but are not recommendations for how much one should consume.
My brain hurts
I don't even know what
listening
that
to that.
But like here's a standard one. If you get chips in the US, tortilla chips, the serving size is always like 8 chips.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like you're not going to catch me ever eating 8 chips.
Never. Like it's
16 to
physically
20
impossible.
seems like a normal low amount, right?
Yeah. And also, like the chips you eat out of the bag before you put them in the bowl don't count as well. So how do you
Exactly.
include those within your dietary
That would be an
requirements?
actual reasonable recommendation.
Yeah.
But so like that means that's how much a person would reasonably eat in a sitting, but not how much you recommend that they eat. I don't know. This was kind of a deviation from what we're talking about. But to me, like if we revisit this question of like, are nutrition labels helpful?
No.
I don't know. I don't know now. I don't know because they're just so made up.
I think that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
I need to revisit my answer here. Yeah, so can we just like go back 30-ish years so we can just get rid of them?
Or like
That
make
gets
it
my
make
vote.
sense.
Yeah, that would probably be a lot safer than
Yeah.
getting rid of food labels altogether. Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the history of it and like kind of how we came to be and how wild some of the recommendations are. But what I want to talk about here is the accuracy of labels. So one interesting study out of the National Institute of Diabetes aimed to address this very question. The researchers independently measured the nutrition facts of 24 popular snack foods like chips, cookies, and crackers. They also measured the macronutrients of a subset of 10 foods. The goal was to see whether the reported nutrition facts hold up to what is actually in the package. Now, the study found that the actual median serving weight varied about 0.5 grams, a half a gram from the reported weight. That's so minimal. I am very surprised by that. In addition, the median number of calories in each snack was about 7 calories higher than reported. This difference in calories can be explained by a significantly higher percentage of carbohydrates than what was reported. I have to say this shocked me. I was really ready for the difference to be a lot more significant between the purported nutrition facts and what's actually in the snack. I don't know about you.
No, I'm with you there. I would have put money on it being a bigger margin of error.
So here's a limitation here, because I did expect different results here. Through this study, they studied like popular brand name snacks. We're talking like Nabisco, Kellogg's, whatever. And those are far more accurate because of the manufacturing process and standards than something like a local product or a restaurant. So then naturally I had to go look at the difference between calorie labels on the restaurant versus the true caloric value. And these were like a little more on par with what I was thinking, but I'll say more dramatic, with most of the variability being in the fat content of the restaurant food. So the real fat content being much higher than what was listed. And in low calorie items, like, do you know what Denny's is? It's like a diner.
The diner? Yeah, Denny's. Yeah, I've been to Denny's. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have Denny's there?
No, when I went to the US,
Okay.
we went to Denny's because it was cheap.
Yes,
so,
it's
yeah.
cheap. They have like a fit and lean menu or something. And there's a lot of main chain restaurants that have like the leaner option, right? Or like the fit menu, whatever. A lot of these menu items were double the calories they said they were. A few triple. So
That doesn't surprise me.
no, it doesn't
at
surprise
all.
me either. It's also like, whoa, yikes. These were some takeaways from a report done by Consumer Reports and by Tufts University. I'll put it in the show notes because it was really interesting to see their graphs and like here's the menu caloric information. Here's what we recorded. They used a bomb calorimeter. It was like real, they were really getting real information here. So anyway, that was less surprising. That was more on par with what I thought the difference would be.
Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. Like a factory pumping in a set amount of food is going to be pretty standardized. Whereas go to a restaurant, let's be honest, a lot of restaurant workers, underpaid,
Right.
don't care. They're just going to like throw in whatever they think should be
Think
the
about,
right
like,
amount.
cooking oil, right?
You just can't, it's not going to be accurate every time. No chance.
Right. So the FDA actually allows for a 20% difference between the labeled calorie content and the actual calorie content of food. So we can
That's
think
a
of something
lot.
like, yeah, it's kind of a lot. Think of like a Greek yogurt, like a single serve tub thing. And say if it's labeled 100 calories, it could actually be 80 to 120, which
Good maths.
that feels like a pretty significant
Yeah, yeah.
deviation, right?
Yeah, that's what I kind of assumed that they would be that far out. But you're saying in the previous research that they're not actually that far out,
Well,
despite
I don't know. It's
having
just
that
one
margin of error.
large study I found. And the reason it was so robust is because it was looking at like really standard food items. I don't know, like mass produced.
Okay,
So I feel like the smaller production, the more variability there would be. That's what makes sense to me.
likely.
But I
You'll
don't have
probably
anything to back
find,
that up.
yeah, it kind of makes sense though, because if you've got fewer eyes on your product, you could probably say it's got lower sugar intake than it actually has because there's a margin of error there, so you can make your product look healthier to the general public. So
Right.
yeah, makes sense.
So we have these like real funky serving sizes based on we don't know. Who knows what? I don't know. Variability in true caloric intake. And then I had to give honorable mention to the fact that the number of calories reported on a package doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of energy we extract from the food, right? So if we rewind back to our favorite episode from season 1, it was an interview with our friend, Dr. Giles Yo, a genius. And we talked mostly about genetics, but he taught us how different food preparations and biological systems can impact the extraction of calories. So in fact, USDA reported that in one study, a serving of almonds is labeled as 170 calories, but will actually deliver 129 calories. Some of the energy is needed to break down the nuts, and some is lost to waste. So the amount of calories you actually gain from a food can really depend on your gut bacteria, cooking methods, and even the shape of your intestines. And there's a whole emerging field of research on this topic.
On that point, the shape of your intestines, I feel like I should have known that. How the shape of your intestine determines how well you absorb your
Maybe
food.
there's variability in like the length of your small intestine, so it's like more time digesting or less. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that does
I
make
don't
sense.
know. My favorite fact to throw around from Giles, and I can't remember if he said this in our podcast episode or if it was a different one that I listened to from him.
We'll pretend it was in ours because
It
it
was in
was
ours.
such a
It
great
was in ours.
episode. Yeah.
It was in ours, definitely. I can think back to him referencing celery. And if we eat a piece of celery, like a stick of celery raw, it's about 6 calories. If we cook that celery, like in a stew, soup, whatever, and break down the cellulose in it, it becomes about 30 calories. And all that to say, like the nuance and the challenges of nutrition research never ceases to amaze me. So what do we think about this, Michael? We're talking about a lot of inaccuracies and a lot of estimations going on here. And the goal of nutrition labels is to help us understand what we're eating and make informed decisions. Within this context of all of this variability, do we think that the nutrition labels are helpful?
I didn't know if that was like a question actually directed to me or it's just like a general. Okay, that's
To you,
good.
Michael,
So
pass the mic.
yeah, sorry, there's someone else here. It's me. Yeah, do you know? I think it kind of just backs up our approach that both you and I take, Kate, already in the fact that it's good to be a little bit informed, like occasionally going through like a food tracking process. Where you become informed about the different foods that you regularly eat can be a really good educational process, but don't put too much emphasis on it because there is so much variability and potential unknown in that. So, yeah, gain a little bit of knowledge, do the work to improve your knowledge around food intake and the foods you like to eat, but then kind of transition into a more intuitive way of eating, if we want to use that word, in just kind of going by how it makes you feel and what you think is best, using your intuition and the new knowledge that you've got.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No,
I
it
don't know if I was
totally does.
rambling there. Yeah.
Well, I think that knowledge is like essential to create a foundation to which like you can reach a more intuitive place with your nutrition.
Yeah, agreed.
Like I don't, this is a personal belief, I don't believe you can become more intuitive and mindful of your nutrition without some knowledge to back it up. I think we need that knowledge first. Now here's something I thought. I've shared this with clients before using Dr. Giles' celery example, but this kind of gave whole new perspective to this topic. I talk with my clients often about how, look, there's all of this variability, like in this celery, cooked versus raw, whatever. So when you're tracking your food, you're not even doing it perfectly. So can that be full permission to like not stress so much about it, to like just like kind of estimate and see how you're feeling and get some general awareness around your food choices and then like kind of move on with life, you know? It's all an estimation. So the best thing that we can do is use that knowledge to build habits that support us. So like, you know, say a client who is using tracking in some capacity as, you know, a tool right now for them, say they're hung up on tracking a meal out accurately. Like, I think that knowing that everything is kind of inaccurate gives us permission to focus on the basics. Like, okay, well, could you have a protein with your meal? Could you have a veggie with your meal out? Could you maybe place some guidelines around how many drinks you're going to have rather than stressing about like, oh my gosh, am I tracking this correctly? Does that make sense? Like, I feel like it was
Completely.
more permission.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, and it's the way I'll do it with clients as well. It's I think people don't realize how much flexibility we can have around our nutrition and still make huge strides forward in the direction that you want. And yeah, I've had clients where we've gone through a period of tracking, whether that's like an app or just like a general food diary or whatever, and they're really stressing about like, oh, how much of this can I have when I go for this meal? It's like, it doesn't matter. Like as long as like 70, 80, 90% of the time we're on track, nailing all the basics, there's so much variability in everything we do anyway. Like there's just no point in stressing. Like
Right.
nothing healthy. There's nothing healthy about completely stressing about every single food you're putting into your mouth just because we just don't know. We just really don't know. So yeah, I think this episode will be a good eye opener and hopefully a good piece of the puzzle that we can throw at clients to allow them to be kinder to themselves when it comes to tracking and improving their nutritional knowledge.
Right. So, like, we think about these suggested serving sizes and how they make no sense. Can our serving be what is satiating to us and what feels good for us? Like, I just think it's very permissive in a good way. So, I will say all of that kind of obscure information about the accuracy of the nutrition label for me makes me a little more prone to being like, okay, I see how this can be helpful in this context rather than like, nope, it's just BS. Because it's not. It's not something that that is so cut and dry, so black and white that we can actually measure.
Completely agree. And this gives you full permission to eat Aunt Bessie's toad in the hole every now and again because it's probably not that bad for you. I don't
Exactly.
think. Maybe.
Well,
Who
you know,
knows?
maybe you're excreting a lot more of it than you're
Exactly.
digesting.
Yeah.
So it's actually half the calories. Just kidding. Um, so let's talk about like kind of the crux I wanted to get to here. Is having constant access to calorie information helpful or harmful to us? With all of this nutrition information available at our fingertips, does any of it actually influence consumer behavior? Now, one meta-analysis I looked at 60 studies with over 2 million subjects in total. The analysis found that food labeling correlated with a 6.6% lower calorie intake and a 10.6% lower fat intake overall. Labeling also correlated with a 13.5% increase in vegetable intake. There was very little evidence that food labels impacted the intake of protein, saturated fat, or sodium. They also did not promote the consumption of fruits, whole grains, or other healthy options. It did seem like companies avoided trans fats and sodium if they knew the product would be labeled. Labeled foods were found to have a 64% lower amount of trans fats and 8% less sodium. Overall, it seems like food labels are influential for easily understood targets like calories and fat content. They're not particularly helpful when it comes to promoting other nutrient goals like whole food consumption. So one reason I looked at that meta-analysis is because there are so many studies on this. So many. And that meta-analysis just kind of like a nice summary of, it said 60 studies. So 2 million subjects, 60 studies. And the trends we're seeing here are reading labels, lower calorie intake, lower fat intake, increased vegetable intake, but not necessarily the knowledge about why would fruits and veggies and whole grains be helpful for us, right? Which we wouldn't really expect because it's not like a nutrition label's education, it's more awareness, right?
Yeah. And I guess
I
also there's like usually not nutrition labels on like general whole food
right.
produce like fruits and vegetables.
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
huge limitation.
Hmm.
Here's some other takeaways, and I'll reference all these in the show notes. Like I said, there were so many studies I went through, but here's a few like bullet points from a few different ones I looked at outside of that meta-analysis. In a study looking at worksite cafeterias, food labels led to improved dietary intake without a difference in total energy intake. So, people with the food labels are making more healthful food decisions, but they weren't consuming fewer calories.
Okay, that's positive.
Yeah, I think that's positive.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's different than just reaching for the green label, which is the low calorie. It's being more in tune with what's a more healthful option. A
Hmm.
study on front of pack nutrition labels, like those we talked about here in Mexico, found that this style of labeling can increase consumers' interest in healthful eating and create more favorable attitudes towards health if the information is presented simply. So that has gotten people more interested in, oh, is this a good option for me? And I feel like that's pretty valuable just to have the awareness to like think about food choices. Um, and then specifically in adults, another large study in Missouri found that label reading can be associated with diets higher in fruit, vegetables, and fiber, which is kind of different than what we saw in that big meta-analysis. But so I specifically tried to look at broad populations and larger studies here, and the results point to changes in eating behaviors when attention is given to the nutrition labels.
It had a smaller impact than I thought it would. I thought those numbers, like the percentages you gave in terms of how much they influence people's food choices, I thought would maybe be a little bit bigger than that. I also, I don't know if you're going to go onto this, so ignore me if you do. Wonder if, like, what the influence is in terms of people's relationship with food too, as well. I'm sure you're probably going to go. Are you going to touch on this? Sorry, I don't know. I don't
Well,
want to touch on the
no, because
topic.
we haven't measured. There's nothing that I can find that's measured that really. So that's
Mm.
what I want you and I to talk about without me necessarily having any studies to fortify
Hmm.
our thoughts. Before we get to that, let's talk about one more thing real quick, and then I want us to kind of like decide where we're standing here. Calorie information isn't just exclusive to packaged foods anymore. Here in the US, larger chain restaurants, like we've already talked about, have been required to publish calorie counts on their menus since the Affordable Care Act was signed in 2010. Do you have the same thing going on with
It's
menus?
only just recently
Okay.
happened. So it got introduced to the UK. I want to say last year, maybe the year before.
Oh,
Time
wow.
goes too fast. I think, yeah, maybe a couple years ago it was compulsory in England, maybe Wales. Apologies if I'm getting that wrong. And then they introduced it into Scotland, or they were considering introducing it into Scotland last year, but they actually put a pause on it because of the impact they actually looked at the research, which is very reassuring, into the kind of mental health impacts in terms of people with disordered eating and eating disorders
Mm.
too. So they've actually put a pause on that. However, a lot of businesses that are based in England and Wales and Scotland just did a sweep and put them on all of the menus
Mm.
because money.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting that Scotland was like, nah, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a big sweeping statement here, but Scotland seems to have a bit more tact and a bit more sensible when it comes to pretty much everything. Hence why we are also living here and not in England.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they did that because I was worried that they were just going to follow suit because it was easy, but the fact they kind of put a pause on it and wanted to take a bit of a more careful approach is, yeah, it's really reassuring.
So the goal with the calorie counts on menus is to make the patrons aware of how calorie dense restaurant food often is. But to your point, there's far more mixed data and a lack of long term data available on consumer habits after this introduction of calorie information on menus. And I feel like the calorie information on menus has far more potential negative repercussions than just the nutrition labels themselves.
Agreed. And also on the fact that you mentioned about like the wide variability in terms of what's actually put on the
Right.
plate compared to
Right.
what
I
says on
can
the menu.
I can think of like, you know how, well, I guess that's newer for you. I remember like a large shift in this calorie counts on menus, and like the awareness it brought to like, oh, I thought a salad was always the way to go, but this salad's actually high in calorie. I could get a burger for the same, right? Like there's little things like that that I feel like maybe add to the bank of knowledge around nutrition, but I don't know if that cancels out like feeling like you want to stare up at a menu and you know being barraged by these numbers that you don't really want to know about. You just want to eat what sounds good.
I completely agree. And I don't know. I think it's just a little window into a society that thinks it's doing the right thing without taking the bigger picture. Like, why don't you have, we got QR code scanners now. Why don't we have a little QR code scanner? You can scan it and then it will tell you the information for the people that want to be informed rather than just sweeping statement of, right, everything's on the menu now. And then those people that really don't like that because of disordered eating, eating disorders, whatever, they're negatively impacted. I think if we can do it in a sensible way, that means that people will be informed rather than harmed in the process.
I agree. I want to share this really interesting excerpt on an article from Forbes that I read. And the author is a law professor who lectures on food regulation, and he's also a global expert on consumer market regulation. So, in speaking about newer food labeling protocols and requirements, he says, if lawmakers want to improve the dietary choices of Americans, sorry, we're speaking with the context of US here, the first thing they need to recognize is that the problem is not information. He goes on to say how seeing like 1,400 calories on a burger at Hardee's doesn't make you understand the burger is, quote, unhealthy. Like, you knew that and you wanted the burger anyway, right? There's a lot of nuance in that topic, but he follows with this. For consumers in underserved communities where obesity is prevalent, the problem is lack of affordable supply of better food. Here, social policy should begin by improving access to grocery choices, but access is not enough. Healthy food has to be affordable. Access and subsidies are effective but expensive policies. They require budgets. This explains why labelism is winning the day. For government, food labels are really cheap.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
It's an easy thing to do, right?
Absolutely.
To make it look like you're doing something really beneficial without like genuinely getting to the root cause of why potentially people will want to know that information.
Right. So his take is that labels are an out for the government, like an easy out, to act like they're addressing health and nutrition on a population level. And I don't disagree at all.
I agree. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not helpful at all, but it's not anywhere near like addressing the root cause. I want to tell you a little story. So in my short stint in my PhD, we had a journal club, and it was my first semester. I was brand new PhD candidate, and I was chosen to host journal club. And I brought a journal about food labeling for us to all go through, and talking about pros and cons. And for context, I was studying public health. So public health is very, very different than individual health, right? We're thinking about population level. And so I was talking about food labeling, potential pros and cons, and how there can be pros because on a population level, this is something that we can implement, right? Now, there was this kid he was 2 years ahead of me. He was in the same program, but 2 years ahead. And he like went off on me about how we don't need food labeling. We need more high quality foods. We need better access. We need less processed foods, etc. Like, he wasn't wrong, but I got so butthurt. I can't even tell you, because he like went off on me in front of everyone. This was my first time hosting and I felt so attacked. And I was frustrated because what he was saying is true, right? But we were in a public health program, chronically underfunded, limited resources. Of course, like, we're all here wanting to change the world and eliminate food deserts and make food accessible and affordable and provide education to all the populations, you name it. But when you don't have the means to do it, is having more awareness of our food choices and the content of our foods through things like food labels helpful? I think maybe. Like, that's kind of my closing argument. We, as individuals or as coaches or as people working in public health, don't necessarily have the means to change the root cause. We can try in small ways, but we can't do an overhaul of the food system. Like, I want to, that'd be great.
I mean, yeah, I completely agree. And it's why me and you do what we do, right? Like, I'm not working for the government that can change policy to improve the societal breakdown that's happened throughout the last few decades, right? But if I can have a little bit of help or help people along the way, then I still think it's beneficial. I don't think what I'm doing is a complete waste of time because I'm having a small impact. It's just a piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
So if we go back to the initial question, what do we think? Nutrition labels, helpful, harmful?
Also, I just want to say that guy was a dick. Anyway,
yeah, he was really
Kate.
mean. I can't remember his name because like blocked it out. I just remember he said something about
get his name. Let's
butter.
call him out.
He said something about
oh no.
Yeah, and I was like, oh man, no. Back to the question: nutrition labels, Helpful, harmful. It's the answer we always give. It depends. It depends, right? But I think they can be a helpful tool when we take into context that they're flawed, that they're estimations, that they're just merely maybe sometimes recommendations and a way to bulk up our knowledge about food, and they're not law, right? Now, where I think they're harmful is to what you said in the beginning, is if we put too much stock in them. I'm not sure how I feel about the calories on the menus. I feel like that one's a little more iffy, but I feel like maybe, hopefully, we can take all this information and say, okay, well, I learned a lot more about nutrition labels. They're kind of flawed. I'm going to use them as like bumpers on my bowling lane, like just general, very general recommendations and not law, and not focus on them as much as I maybe have in the past because they don't hold that much power.
I completely agree. I wish I could throw something here that argues against that, Kate, to make the episode more exciting at the end. But no, I completely agree. And it's the way I look at labels now, right? If I see something's red on a label, for example, I might be like, well, let's check the ingredients. Oh, it's not a big deal. Or yeah, it's just like a little bit of a piece of the puzzle in terms of being informed about my nutrition, but I don't really put too much of an emphasis on it. It sounds like I should probably carry on doing that.
I think you're right there. I think your first answer was great. And I would love to hear from listeners what you think. And maybe some anecdotal experience on how labels have kind of impacted your relationship with food, if that's been the case. Like I said, my first understanding of labels was just like, ooh, high numbers, bad, no, and now it's like, take it with a grain of salt. This is just some general information. But it takes time to get there, right? So I hope that some of this information can help you along that path to get to where it's more just a tool in your arsenal rather than like the end all be all.
Completely agree. And I think also it can be a pretty good red flag if you're starting a group, a diet approach, whatever it is, and they're telling you to really obsess over labels. And like there's a lot of big weight loss groups like Slimming World, Weight Watchers. A lot of people that I work with, you can kind of tell straight away when they've come from being in those group environments for a long period of time because of the types of food they're choosing is all the green things from the UK, right? Well, low fat, low sugar, low everything, where in fact, if you're looking at that as, oh, look, that's low fat, low sugar, that's great. It's just such a limited way of looking at food because it's probably going to be low calorie. It's not going to satisfy you. It's not going to fill you up. You're not going to have any enjoyment from the food that you're eating. Therefore, how helpful is that in a grander scheme of things? But yeah, that's really cool. Thanks, Kate. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was probably more information than anyone ever wanted on food labels, but that's
Never.
what you get.
All the information, please.
All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you all again in 2 weeks.
See ya.